Good morning, welcome back. This is Daybreak and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Wilson Sosion on my immediate right is the former nominated lawmaker. Good morning and Happy New Year. And
former SG KNUT. Good morning and Happy New Year.
Thanks to you too for making the broadcast and Happy New Year to you too. The former president of the Law Society of Kenya and advocate Eric Deuri is with us in the studio as well. Good morning.
Morning, Ayub, and Happy New Year to you and our listeners.
And Happy New Year to you too. John Kagusha is the lawmaker representing Mukurweini constituency from the county of Nyeri. Good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely having you on the broadcast.
Thank you very much and Happy New Year, our viewers.
Yeah. And the Deputy Government Spokesperson, Gabriel Muduma, is with us here. Good morning, Gabriel.
A good morning. We are never walking alone, and a Happy New Year.
And you nearly walked alone. We'll be talking about
we nearly. We'll never walk alone.
All right, gentlemen, let's begin with the priority for many parents across the country today, and that includes the learning institutions that are reopening, and this as learners across the country plan on reporting to schools today on Monday. The Ministry of Education has released an update on the plans for financing of education, status of classrooms for junior secondary schools and other key concerns for the year. Education CS Julius Ogamba Migos says the Teacher Service Commission and the ministry plan to deploy qualified primary school teachers to junior secondary schools in a bid to progressively ensure adequate staffing across learning institutions, and especially so at a time that the grade 9 learners are expected to begin their final level of junior secondary school. On capitation, the Cabinet Secretary has outlined funds disbursement schedule for the year. Out of the total 96.5 billion shillings allocated to basic education institutions, 50% will be released in the first term, 30 in the second term, and 20 in the final term. And out of the 48.3 billion shillings set to be disbursed this term, we'll get 4.1 billion shillings will go to free primary education, 15.3 billion shillings to free day junior secondary school education, and 28.9 billion shillings to free day secondary education, where each learner in public institutions is allocated an equal amount. The CS says they are working with the National Treasury for the release by the Exchequer to facilitate the timely disbursement. On the running concerns of the preparedness for grade 9, the Cabinet Secretary also said out of 16,000 new classrooms that the government has intended to construct to accommodate grade 9 learners, the completion status is 93%. He also noted that some of the institutions have gaps, advising that they look for alternative spaces within institutions and, where possible, merge streams for the time being as the schools reopen. Gentlemen, let's now start on that note and coming to you first, Honorable John Kagusha. Being a lawmaker, what do you make of this? Are we prepared?
Well, we are preparing well, I would say, and there has been a lot of efforts to ensure that classrooms are constructed. In Mukurweini, for example, I only had 3 schools which do not have the class 9. And over the holidays, the ministry did move in to give resources, and they should be completing those classrooms very soon. Only 3 schools. And so for Mukurweini, we will be set to start the year 9, at least on the issue of infrastructure. But there are other areas where we will need to address and address very fast, especially on the issue of capitation, because you realize that schools have been receiving not sufficient money to run the schools. You know, government has been subsidizing education. And so you find like we are closing the year without submitting all the resources that are required. So most of the teachers do suffer a lot to run the schools, especially when it comes to activities and also the issue of learning materials. You know, one of the misgivings about the system we are having is that the ministry has been supplying materials like books and such, instead of sometimes allowing the schools themselves to just acquire these materials. And the problem with this is that sometimes they don't get sufficient materials, they don't get the right ones, they don't get them in good time, and you find that one is a big challenge. And of course, there is also the challenge and the problem of the wheeler dealers at the ministry level, you know, doing those procurement processes and all that. So sometimes you also don't get the value for money. So you'll find that what you are supposed to be getting advantage of in terms of economies of scale is also lost in the issue of procurement problems. So I think those are some of the areas that we'll need to check. But by and large, there has been deliberate efforts from what I have seen, especially during the whole of this holiday time, from the PS who has been doing so many meetings to ensure that at least we are on. Having said that, I still believe that we have a challenge with the system because, you know, we have now removed Form 1 and taken it to class 9 or to grade year 9. And the challenge we have is that we had so many other facilities in high schools. And now we have to start developing new facilities in primary schools or in junior secondary schools. Okay. And you see, we had also human resources in terms of teachers at the high schools. And now again, we have to hire more teachers at the level of junior secondary schools, whereas what we had was still not sufficient in terms of human resources. But in terms of the infrastructural resources that we had in high schools, we are now, you know, abandoning that to construct new infrastructure in junior secondary schools and in primary schools. So I find that we are we are not enhancing and optimizing the resources that we are having. And the other issue, of course, is that we are still not very clear from the ministry on how we shall move from year 9 to year 10.
Okay. Honorable Sosion, certainly beyond the financing gaps, schools will be opening their gates today to infrastructure gaps as well, is it?
Yeah, not only infrastructure, the teacher challenge and teaching and learning resources, and also dealing with the new education model and structure. I dare say Kenya has done very well in terms of investing in education. That's a fact for sure. Because when you look at the funding to education, we meet the minimum UNESCO requirement of at least 6% of the GDP.
Which is a third of our budget.
Correct. Yes, and then at least 15% of the overall budget, which we are doing around 28. But then, from the minister's breakdown of 50% first term.
30-20.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is timely disbursement of all the money. That's a key thing. And then ensuring that this money is audited. The problem that we have is that the money is not audited. We are not able to check exactly whether it's giving value for their money and for the money. And what Honorable Kagusha is talking about in terms of procurement, I think there are a lot of issues that came up about procurement and vested interest, and this can be weeded out through a strong education supervision system. The Cabinet Secretary Education was ordered by the court to establish ESCAC, that is Quality Assurance and Standards Program is provided in law, which has not been implemented since 2012. And I don't think we make laws for the sake of window dressing. It must be implemented so that then we have an education system that really is properly supervised. So to me, from my professional perspective, some of these questions and the issues that keep popping up can rather be handled through policy intervention by ensuring that we have a strong quality assurance and standard system and audit system in education.
Why was that system, for 13 years, why was that system not
I think
implemented?
That is phobia from the bureaucrats at the ministry. And you see, if we have government position and even legislation that has been legislated by Parliament, we should not allow ministers or government officials to have the luxury to choose to follow the law, not to follow. And we may be talking about these challenges on and on and on because of such a collapsed system. Look at fires in school, for example. It's due to non-compliance. But if inspection of school is done regularly and continually, we would not have some of these challenges. And we'll see the value of the investment in our education system. Then very quickly, the other aspect is addressing the teacher shortage, which I think more than any other time before, the current employment of teachers to meet the deficit within the policy plan and program of Kenya Kwanza administration is one of the biggest strides. But then the problem that we have is that we have a new curriculum. We've got new learning areas, and teachers were actually not trained. That is one area that needs to be addressed, so that by and by we can have a curriculum that is implemented with the teachers who actually are available. Otherwise, I think as a country, we are thinking through very well on what to do with an education system. And the Presidential Working Party on Education and Reform gives a lot of recommendations. We've talked about empty classrooms in secondary. I dare say those classrooms will not be empty because we are moving to the big transition. And I think the challenge that we have facing the education now is the big transition from grade 9 to 12. And we are talking about pathways. We will require computer labs, we will require electricity rooms, we will require power mechanics room, we will require home science room, we will require music rooms. So those rooms are available to be equipped this particular year in readiness for the next transition. Furthermore, don't forget, CBC classes are supposed to be smaller in terms of numbers for effective teaching and learning. So as a country, we are moving to smaller and more rationalized class sizes with more teachers and more intensive teaching. So really, I don't see any reason anybody, any school or anybody in this country talking about classes being empty and underutilized, I don't think understands what you're talking about in terms of CBC. And now the comprehensive school model, that is consolidation of grade 1 to 9 within a day school, closer home, which was a former primary school, is taking shape, and building of additional classrooms and raising quality are key programs that needs to be done. There is a lot of work in the education sector. A lot of policy reviews needs to be done. Constant curriculum review also needs to be done. And all hands on deck professionally are required this year.
Eric, only a few schools out of the 348 that the government had shut down had managed to comply with the safety protocols. And this is also a major concern as learning institutions reopen their gates today. I mean, what then can be done about this? Because it appears that the society is being stratified in the context of education, that some can access education and some can't.
Ayub, I think we, as a country, we have serious challenges in the education sector. We must appreciate the efforts that are being done by the government and the various stakeholders to ensure that we get to reasonable standards of compliance. One of the first things that we need to appreciate is the legal and regulatory infrastructure with regards to education. The recognition that education at a very basic level is an inherent right that should be made available to each and all. And then that second, that it is the responsibility of the government primarily to ensure that that obligation is met and sustained. And so when you look at everything that is happening within the education sector, there's a lot of things that are being implemented almost at the same time. And the coherency of that implementation, the smoothness in the transition is not there. And that is creating a lot of gaps, which gaps are obviously frustrating to not only the parents and the students, but also the teachers. And so you have an entire country that is restless. The Mandarians and the ministry are trying to implement. But when you look at some of the gaps, especially legal gaps in compliance, you begin to get the feeling that we are not preparing as best as we can. Because how do we, for example, say we will close schools because they have not complied? We need to be having discussions in terms of what are the steps that you need to comply, what do you need to do. And that brings into context to the question of quality assurance in the systems that are there, and the fact that largely the legal framework that has been created to ensure that that happens has not been complied with. And you see now where the problem comes in. And I think at a certain point we should not be lost on blame apportioning and finger pointing. Yeah. We just need to get our act together. The only problem that we have is that education and the provision of quality education is so critical to everything that we want to do in this country. And we know that for majority of us, the only change that we can give to our children and to every other generation that comes into us is education. And that is how critical it is. And so there is a need to get our act together faster than we actually are doing it, much as we appreciate the efforts that are going on, but there's a need to see more urgency in terms of implementation, and to see more focus and more clarity in the various transitional mechanisms that are ongoing, so that we ensure that those that fall within the cracks are dealt with, and that in a year, in the year to come, and then in this year, that we will have less and less complaints in terms of the challenges that we are facing in the sector.
Okay. And Gabriel, how then is the challenge of the transition and the unpredictability around these challenges facing guardians and parents be addressed from the government's point of view?
Thank you, Ayub. You may recall a few months ago we had a town hall meeting at KICC with the President, where matters education were discussed, and key among the thematic areas, and I'm glad my good friend Bonasosion has actually discussed primarily most of those thematic areas, which number one was the infrastructure, the learning materials, and the third one really was the human resource. And as you can see, and what our good brothers have all agreed, that there has been deliberate attempts to ensure that we do as much as possible to really work on the glaring issues that need to be worked on. And key, one that I can point out really is the unprecedented of the 56,000 plus teachers being onboarded. You know, this is something that has never happened in this country.
It's now 70,000. So
now heading 70,000. This is, in the history of this country, it tells you there is deliberate attempts really to ensure that education gets to where it needs to be. So yes, you're talking about the inefficiencies. These are things I think we can already deal with. That has already, been in the pipeline. For instance, you just saw, I was over the weekend where PS Belio was meeting the stakeholders in preparation of opening this year's term. And if you had the deliberations, they covered nearly the same issues that we are talking about, including the exams, where many people thought that they will be delayed, the results will be delayed. That's not going to happen. The results will come out on time. I think probably this week, that's when we're expecting these results. Secondly, the major issue again was the safety that Wakili has talked about. And it was good to even hear the parents now having their hands, their skin in the game, in PTAs and in school boards. They want to follow up. These are children who are coming to these institutions. How ready are we when it comes to matters safety? How ready are we when it comes to matters security? You remember the scare that we had in Nyeri.
Inside in Darasha Academy.
Yes. So I am glad to see stakeholders now coming up and saying, now we demand to see the kind of action. We demand to see what you put on paper. We demand to see the policies, the safety policies that you put in schools. So I think this holistic approach on matters, Ayub, not only from the public schools, but also from the private schools, it's something that we'll all need to be grateful for. And I think the putting of hands together to address these common challenges is the one that will get us up.
And one major challenge to remedy one of the tragedies that happened in 2024, as you have pointed out, in the Hillside and Darasha Academy, was the expansion of the infrastructure across schools in the country. And now The minister says that it's 93% complete, but a study of this shows out of the planned 18,000 classrooms, the number that is complete across the country is 3,500, only 7,500 in various stages of completion, another 7,000 projected and but yet to be built. How will this be consolidated? Given the urgency around infrastructure across schools, in the example you have mentioned, how will this be fast-tracked?
The urgency of the moment is going to be here for the longest. One thing I'm actually glad that we are talking about has been the expansion. And my good friend, Honorable Sosion, can tell you, I was doing a stint in education when we had the fires and the incidents at Moi Girls, remember, in Kibra. That is when that discussion was started. And then the CS was Madam Amina. And they set a raft of the schools that needed to be given, you know, that uptick in the restructuring. And by the way, I sat in the committee on titling, and you may recall that was first the mandate that we took was to ensure how do we increase the acreage of schools because it was shrinking. Sad to say that when institutions, let me say without other jurisdictions, that the plans are to continue building up on institutions, ours, by the way, were shrinking. A school that had, a school that had 40 acres, you go 3 years, 5 years down the line, those 30 acres have shrunk to 20. So there was a committee that I was in that took the mandate of ensuring that many schools get back their acreages. And this is now where you give rise.
What are the recommendations of that committee?
Oh, by the way, he will tell you, we have recovered in that committee the policies that we put out, the report that came out. We've had other schools going and getting back their original acreages because the issue was to increase the acreage. And here now comes the infrastructure that you're talking about. If it's new dormitories, because let's admit it, there were times that these schools and classes, I mean, you had so many students in a particular class. In the dorms, it was the very same thing. So for you to increase the structures, to build better structures, you needed the acreage. And this is what now we were able to come up with. So when the minister deliberately says that they have instituted nearly to a 90% coverage on the new infrastructure, I think with time, there are some of the things that will come out.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, when we get back from the break in the broadcast, Honorable Kagusha will be coming to you. We'll be focusing on also the other matters that have been happening in the country, and the year ended 2024, and the spillover effect felt in 2025. Today, right activists will be resuming their demonstrations of abductions, and will be discussing the state of human rights and the security of Kenyans here on the broadcast, as well as welcoming your remarks and contributions here on the broadcast. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. We are back with more after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.